welcome back, everyone. You are listening to the Solvable Mysteries Podcast. My name is Juras. I'm joined by my co-host, Glenn Highcove. How are you feeling, my friend?
Hey, I'm doing okay. I think yesterday and today were the first times I'd been anywhere besides my house in probably the past almost 2 weeks.
Right. Regarding the current situation with
Yeah.
COVID-19. I don't know, man. I don't really want to get into COVID-19. I feel like you could get those news everywhere else. So I think we could definitely pass up on talking about that for now. And we have an interesting case on our hands today. This is the Lindy Chamberlain case, or I guess you could call Azaria Chamberlain case, whichever way you want to put it. I guess it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really change the events that we're about to talk about. So as always, I ask you before we get into these cases, have you heard anything about it when it was happening? But this case, this whole situation that we're going to be discussing happened in 1980. So I'm not sure if you were following up on things back then. Were you a kid or something?
4 years old. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's a good question though, because sometimes stuff like that would, even back then, the pre-internet days, I could see stuff like that jumping over internationally. I mean, it's kind of weird because I think as we get into it, we'll find that there's kind of this bubble of awareness that kind of spreads out from the event, and then there's some pop culture references that I think kind of bring people back to the events again, where they're like, really, that happened? So yeah, I don't think I ever heard about anything about it until there was a Simpsons episode where it was one of the jokes, and I was like, what are they talking about? And I had to go look it up.
Right. So the joke was that they were referring the famous sentence, "The dingo took my baby," or ate my baby.
Yeah.
One of those, right?
A dingo ate my baby.
Right. I mean,
it's not funny, but I mean, I guess it became so awful that it was
right.
Not awful again. Yeah.
It was actually funny for the time when people actually believed that it was all fake. But then come to find out that this it is most likely what actually happened, and then using that joke is making fun of a person who just lost his legs or something, saying, I just lost my leg in Vietnam, and then everyone laughing. So I feel it's a similar situation, which is it's odd. People on Seinfeld made that reference multiple times. Simpsons have, as you mentioned. So it's, when you look back at it, it's definitely dark, and I feel like the people that were behind the creative ideas to use that reference, I think they sort of regret it now, because oh boy, what this woman that you are seeing right now on the if you're watching this on YouTube, if you're seeing her image, this is Lindy Chamberlain with her I believe 9-week-old daughter, Azaria Chamberlain, right? Because
really young.
Right. So what I was going to say is that this woman has went through so much stuff, and we're gonna get into it, but at one point she was pregnant, in prison, and they took her to the hospital to give birth to her fourth child, and they took that child away from her within a year. Within 1 hour. So what's that all about? But
that's ridiculous.
Oh my God,
I don't think that they do that now. Now I think they actually let, if you're a woman and you have at least here in the States, if you have a baby in jail, they actually let you spend time with the baby, and they kind of figure out something. They don't just strip somebody away.
And back then, the Australians you cough up the baby and go back to prison, lady, so
Yeah.
It's definitely very dark to think about. That's the whole case. When I was reading into it, the fact that they took her baby away, after like 1 hour after she was pregnant in prison. Like being pregnant in prison is like bad enough, you know? And then taking the baby away, and now you go back to your cell. You can just like chill out in the cell now, lady. So it was like, man, it just really, you know, messed me up. It's you know, it just made me think like that this woman has been through a lot, you know, like probably more than people realize. Right. So I guess we can like get into the gist of the case. So why was she imprisoned? What led to her being imprisoned? Well, after she had her third child, essentially Azaria, because she had two sons. What were her sons' names again? They were like really weird. One of them was like Reagan, which is, or something like that, right? I'm trying to find their names.
Yeah, here they are. So the sons are. Yep, you got the second one was Reagan. Maybe I don't know. Maybe it's Regan. I don't know. Yeah, Regan. The first one was Aiden.
Oh, so the first one is like
Aiden.
pretty nice. The second one is a little bit weird, but then again, Azaria is also like an interesting name to give to your child. I think those are nice names, by the way. So okay, she has her third child named Azaria. So this little baby that you are seeing on the image, and everything's, you know, like. By the way, some background on who Lindy Chamberlain was. She was married to a guy named Michael Chamberlain, right? And they were part of a Seventh-day Adventist church. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Yep.
Seventh-day Adventist church, right? So, you know, they were quite a religious family. Now, I don't know much about like the Seventh-day Adventist church, but it says that they are like a Protestant Christian denomination, which is distinguished by its observance of Saturday. So, you know, as you've mentioned prior to us recording the episode, they emphasize celebrating on the Saturday as opposed to like you know, the standard Roman Catholic, I think. And even like the Protestant way of celebrating, I think it's like on a Sunday, but these guys are doing it on the Saturday. So I guess that's the main difference, right?
Yeah, I'm sure there must be some other, like someone who's maybe like a Protestant minister or something might come on and say there's probably some other little doctrinal differences. I think, just as a side note, the guys in Waco, David Koresh, I think his group was actually an offshoot. Like, I mean, you know, obviously they don't believe necessarily the same things, but I think his group was actually an offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Right.
So they were even more of a branch. But yeah, anyway, in the movie, one of the movie clips that I was watching from this, it sounds like her husband was like, you know, a pretty straight and narrow guy, let's say. Like when I say that, I mean like I think he didn't drink. I don't even think he ate meat. He might have been a vegetarian.
Right. So
he looked like a pretty healthy lifestyle.
This guy on the left hand side, Michael Chamberlain, yeah, he had that really like straight up guy haircut. You know, like every time I see someone with that haircut, you're probably thinking like, this dude's like either a psychopath or he's really a really upstanding person, you know. So
yeah,
so
down.
So if you have like that's the thing, like no, I'm not gonna remember the name, but like, have you seen the movie? I believe it was called No Place for Old People or something like that. Have you, like, man?
Oh yeah, No Country for Old Men.
Yeah, No Country for Old Men.
Oh,
so the main guy, the main villain, had like the same haircut. So
Sugar, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna quickly find it. No Country for Old.
I think he I forget how he picked that haircut on purpose for himself. The actor, they decided it was like a really weird, idiotic haircut that he thought would kind of fit like how weird the character was.
I mean, when you look at it from this standpoint, like you could see that it's either you're either a psychopath, as I've mentioned, or you're a really nice person. But like in Michael's case, it seemed that he was a nice guy.
Actually, now that I think of it, that's a great comparison because the character, even though the character is like obviously breaking the law and doing really horrible things, he has a really strict set of rules for himself. If you know what I mean, like in the, you know what I mean, like in the Dungeons and Dragons world, I think they would call him lawful evil. So he's evil, but he's got a very strict set of laws that he adheres to in his little evil world. So, I mean, obviously we're not saying Michael's evil. Michael's like probably a lawful good person by the Dungeons and Dragons rules. But
Right.
it's interesting to look at that.
I mean, I guess the conclusion that we can make is that if you have this haircut, you're gonna follow a strict set of rules. It doesn't matter if they're good or bad, intentioned. You're gonna be a strict person. Like, this is a strict person haircut. Anyways, I feel like we have been talking about this guy's haircut for a little bit longer than we are supposed to be. So I think we could move along. So okay, so they're married, right? They have 3 kids at that point because the 4th child was not yet even conceived, I believe, and so they have 3 kids. Also, one thing to note, Lindy really wanted a daughter, so that's one thing I've came across, that she really wanted a daughter, and she got one. She got this young little daughter called Azaria, and when they were when she was 9 weeks old, the whole family took a trip to probably the most famous destination in Australia, or at least like one of the most more famous, I guess, national park, outdoorsy type of places in Australia, which is I'm definitely gonna butcher the pronunciation, but it's called the Uluru, or it's either Uluru or Uluru. Pardon me, but like, I think we all have seen this rock, right? I mean, I've definitely known about this rock prior to this case. Have you?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's one of those just those weird formations they always tout when they talk about how interesting Australia's terrain is. And I think when I was looking at the notes, it looks like before, I guess back when this incident happened, they used to be known as Ayers Rock.
Yeah.
So maybe Uluru or Uluru, maybe that's like the Aboriginal name for the area.
Right. I mean, there's probably a bunch of Aboriginals living around this area. Another interesting fact, I'm not sure if you noticed, but this area, I mean, this object, the Uluru Mountains, is literally in the middle of Australia. It's
wow.
It's not even in the like the coastlines or anything. It's literally in the middle of Australia. So
that's like the harshest part of Australia. That's because that's the whole thing about
right?
It's like the whole, like, people, the cities are all on the edge, and then it's like the deeper you get into Australia, the hotter and more barren it gets.
The spiders, the snakes. I mean, you could get like messed up just getting here. So taking a road trip with your like 9-year-old daughter. I mean, it was the 80s, I guess. There wasn't I think much to do anyway, so and they were like they probably were like an outdoorsy type of a family, so they take this trip to Uluru and they set up camp, and essentially weird stuff started happening pretty soon after they do that. So let me just get a timeline real quick. I mean, I guess we could use the Murderpedia timeline for this one. Let me just quickly scroll down to the timeline. So, right, she was born on the June 11th of 1980. Then, on August 17th, on the second night of the family holiday at Ayers Rock. So now, Uluru that we just covered. Azaria, who was then 9 weeks old, she weighed 4.5 kilograms, is put to bed alongside brother Regan, who was 4. Then on the same night, about 8 p.m., Azaria cries and Lindy goes to check on her. she's not in the tent, and then Lindy cries out the famous, I guess, phrase at that point, my god, the dingo got my baby. 300 people, including Aboriginal trackers, searched the area but find nothing. So I guess we could take a little stop in the timeline and discuss what the hell actually happened there. Any thoughts on your end, any interesting details about this whole situation? Because I have a bunch that don't really make sense here, but I guess we're gonna get into them.
I guess it's interesting because I guess it goes both ways. Because on one hand, given what she was accused of, you gotta wonder I get you look at Aboriginal trackers being involved. Well, those are really the experts, right?
Oh,
for the area. Especially given the area, it's that's who's going to know that place inside and out. But gosh, maybe it really speaks to how sneaky the dingoes can be with that food. I think I didn't even realize how deep into the outback the site was. So it's no wonder those dingoes are trying to grab babies, because what is there to eat out there?
Exactly, right?
Each other, right?
Okay, so first of all, I'm not seeing this covered at all, but for me personally, by the way, this is what a dingo looks like. If some of our audience don't know, it's like a dog. It's like a I've read somewhere that they're saying that this is more of a wolf than a dog, but when I look at the pictures, it definitely seems like more of a dog than a wolf to me.
Yeah, it looks like a ridgeback or something. It looks
like a wild dog.
Yeah.
Right. So the first thing that comes into mind, and I'll try to find this picture really quickly while we do this. Right. So I'm not sure if these pictures are the ones that we are looking at right now, if these pictures are from the movie scene, or are these actual pictures of what happened. I may think that this picture that we're looking at right now could be an actual picture from that time, not from the movie. I don't know, man. I have not seen.
I'm contemporary. Yeah.
Right. I haven't seen the movie, so I can't really say, because there was this whole movie about this case with Meryl Streep and all that stuff. So, but that's gonna come up a little bit later on in the show. Now, the weird part about this, and I'm sure you could relate. You leave a 9-week-old baby alongside a 4-year-old child in a tent, and then you go back to the campsite. I don't know, man. I don't know how the situation was with the distances, how far away, but from what I've gathered, it was a fairly a fairly large amount of distance between the campsite and the actual tent. But you go back, you put that baby to sleep, and then you come back to the campsite. I don't know, man. It just seemed odd. Probably something that I would think twice before doing,
Yeah, it's once again, it's kind of similar to some of our other stuff we talked about with this kind of weird. And
Madeleine McCann, especially.
Yeah,
right?
Madeleine McCann, and I know sometimes people in the comments have taken issue with us kind of crapping on the British about it, and I'll say, it's fine. I'll pick on even my own upbringing in the 80s. I feel like in the 80s. People were probably less careful. Definitely I remember stuff like that. But yeah, in the movie, given when you know what's going to happen, and given in the movie they show a little scene where a dingo tries to steal some food or something from them earlier.
Right.
It's really those things are running around grabbing at things, and yeah, it looked like a good, I don't know, 50 yards, 20, 30, 40 yard. Not
right.
It looked way longer than you'd be able to go run to stop a dog from doing something.
Right, which is, I don't want to be Captain Hindsight over here, but, you probably should have not done that. But, that's just me. Who knows, man? Who knows? Maybe it seemed normal, especially back in the 80s, whatever. The part that you've mentioned about in the movie where they show dingoes actually grabbing food from these campers, this was actually the case. That actually did happen, I'm not sure if you know about that, but Michael, so the husband of Lindy, he was actually feeding the dingoes a little bit, like throwing them like pieces of meat, like during the
So
daytime.
attracting them, basically, yeah.
Yeah. And then actually, what Lindy said, though I'm not certain if this was only in the movie or was this in real life, but I feel like I've read somewhere that this was, actually happening. Lindy actually said to Michael, "Stop feeding them. You're encouraging them." So I wonder, why Michael fed them. But like Michael was probably, just like like I'd probably feed the dogs as well. So I don't think there was any malicious intent from anyone here. They were just feeding the dingoes, and I could right.
Maybe it's the only thing you get out there, and you're like, oh look, there's the big rock, I'm not a rock climber, and now what am I gonna do? And it's like the only thing, and they're like, they think they're like feeding the pigeons, they're feeding the dogs. I mean, yeah, because it's like the only thing, like it must have got pretty friggin' boring out there,
especially
after a while,
especially like.
Well, he's not drinking or anything.
I feel like the Uluru has it's like down points, like you take all this time to get to the middle of the Australian outback. You see this rock and it's like, now what? Because like how long would it take to drive here? Like, are you kidding me? This seems like an insanely long amount of time to just drive here, like a day at least,
And I mean, at least for the Aboriginal people, I think the site is some kind of religious significance. Like, I think it's something more important to them than just a big rock. And then, like you said, I mean, just imagine walking there. Yeah, no wonder it's important. If you try, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, if you took all that time to walk out there,
right,
that would be one thing. But yeah, when you can just hop in your station wagon, and drive out there, then you're out there, and it's like, yeah, I mean, if that guy's not even drinking, because I think in the movie, the other families that are there with them, or they're having a barbecue, and they're like, hey, you want to have a drink? And he's like, oh no, not me. It's like, well, what are you doing out here, dude? This is like the drinking and hanging out camp spot, and like you're already not doing 2 out of 3 things
right,
to do out here.
Exactly. So
yeah,
like, what the hell are you doing here? Like, yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. I think it's a fun place to come and visit, but I wouldn't probably want to camp out here. There's probably not that much to do besides, as you've mentioned, having a drink and really relaxing. Especially with little kids. I'd probably think twice about coming here with little kids, but once again, it's the 80s.
Dude, I'll go even farther. Like, the same distance for me is like the Grand Canyon and a bunch of other stuff,
right?
And I won't even do that. And I feel like I'm just gonna tout my country for a second. I feel like our Grand Canyon is way more impressive than this thing. So yeah, for them.
Sure. I would agree. The Grand Canyon is probably cooler.
Way more worth it. Yeah.
Right, and yeah, because nobody wants to actually. What are you actually gonna do there? If you've never been there, sure, but if you've been there a whole bunch of times, it's it loses its what I mean,
allure.
Right? Yeah. There's none of that. Okay, so the child goes missing, right? She comes back. She screams to the whole campers, which there were as I've said before, around 300 people, something like that. No, the 300 people who did a search. My bad. This is another thing that I wanted to ask you. Maybe you have any clue how many campers were there? Because I just couldn't get this detail. I just couldn't find it.
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I'm just gonna guess maybe 10 to 20 families.
Right, which is a sizable amount of people, definitely. Okay, so she comes back running to everyone. She's saying, "A dingo ate my baby," in that accent. Obviously, it wasn't an accent for them, But so she comes back, and everyone's freaking out. They pile a massive search party. There's Aboriginal searchers. There's police officers, the family members, like everyone's searching. 300 people are searching this area. They cannot find anything. The Aboriginals actually spot tracks of a dingo alongside the tents, but I guess they sort of vanish after a while and they cannot track them. So, that's the case right there. And they basically take this case to court, right? Like what actually happened to Lindy's daughter, Azaria Chamberlain, because there's literally no more evidence of what happened to her. It's like she vanished. There were some blood splatters inside of the tent, right? So that's the only thing they could have went off of, because there was no other evidence suggesting where Azaria went. It was almost like a vanishing. Well, if you were looking at it from a standpoint that someone did murder Azaria and or snatched her up, then there would not be evidence. But if you would follow along the theory that the dingo actually took Azaria, then there were some pieces of evidence. There was like a canine hairs in the tent and things like that. So I guess people initially they did not question Lindy's theory, right? At least at first. That's what I've gathered.
Yeah. It really seemed like the coroner was on their side, and it seemed like the people that were like the actual scientists sort of resented the way the police were coming at it. I think they probably saw a disaster in the making in terms of the cognitive biases that they were seeing from the police and from the prosecution, where they were definitely at loggerheads, which is interesting because we've seen that before, right? We've seen that with the John Bonet case, where you saw some significant differences of opinion between different parts of the investigatory authorities.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not uncommon, I guess, for people to have very different opinions in the face of, let's say, evidence that isn't super clear cut. But I guess as we'll see, it feels like I said, these cognitive biases just ended up with like a lot of people finding what they wanted to find and interpreting like these tea leaves of evidence. It was like they took what was supposed to be real science and it turned out it just completely went upside down.
Right. So first of all, there were a whole situation with what was Azaria wearing, right? So by the way, before we move into this part of the story, Lindy Chamberlain and Michael Chamberlain, they were found not guilty, and the official verdict, at least after the initial coroner's response, was that the dingo took their little daughter Azaria, right? Now, I feel like this case could have been left there, and everyone would have been settled with the story, but during the media attention circles and all of the press, this is the face that Lindy was making. Literally, this is how she was looking at that point, and this is not a good look when you're trying to prove your innocence, right? I think you would agree with me, right? Because this definitely, the average person, the average Australian viewer of the news back in the day, this probably looks look at this person, she probably did it, and this guy
looks
with
defensive or something, yeah,
right, and this guy with the haircut, nah, these guys look weird. Also, there was this whole thing with their Seventh-day Advent church whole situation, which made people think oh my god, these people are crazy lunatics. There were actually even theories, now I don't know if you heard about this, but that they actually killed Azaria on purpose because it was a sacrificial ritual that the church that they were in, you have to sacrifice one of your kids, and it was all kinds of messed up stuff. going
like religious prejudice, and just people that
exactly.
didn't know anything about their religion, or and you know
Exactly.
that and that's not an uncommon. I mean, certainly we've seen like there's it's interesting, like in Europe back when Protestants and Catholics were fighting each other.
Oh yeah,
Um,
we had those
like
fights here. Yeah.
right, but then even during that period, you also had Protestants also fighting each other over like
Oh yeah.
whose brand of Protestantism was the correct one, and
Right.
so like yeah, it's
The
just, I mean,
British had their own thing, and then it
yeah,
was
Church of
just a
England, and
yeah, it's just a whole big mess with the
yeah,
religion.
so it's like a modern extension of that, I guess. But
Yeah.
wow, yeah, I mean, the one thing I thought of when I was looking at this, because I was like,
Hmm.
I was reading in this, and like you said, the public really, I mean, there's all these both in the Meryl Streep movie, but I guess there's a lot of documentary footage of just contemporary footage of people being pretty hard on them and saying she was guilty, and like it became like this tabloid thing. Like it almost, in a way, it was kind of almost like their OJ case or something, except not quite 1-to-1 with OJ, but
I heard
like in
about it,
terms of the
like the
yeah
comparisons, like
the tabloid, yeah, the way everybody got into it. The one thing I was thinking is I don't know if you've watched that show The Crown.
I haven't,
Um,
I haven't, I haven't.
okay, so it's about Queen Elizabeth II, who's still alive. But there's this one part where there's like a big disaster. Um,
Right.
in part of England, there's like a big like landslide thing that kills a bunch of children in a school,
Oh
and
wow.
they want the Queen. They want the Queen to go there and kind of show support, and she doesn't want to go, and they're trying to figure out why, and she kind of makes different excuses that, like, wherever she goes is kind of like causing a disaster in itself. But it finally gets down to she has a hard time crying. Like that's just, she's not a crying kind of person,
I
and
see.
she didn't, you know what I mean? So like she didn't want to show up and end up looking like Lindy. Like she didn't. I mean, this is obviously pre-Lindy, but like she had the same kind of concern that like the optics weren't going to be really good if she went there and showed up and wasn't just sobbing and hanging off of everybody and crying for the children. And it was, at the end of the episode, is basically her figuring out a way to kind of do a little bit of acting and motivate herself to do some crying and shedding some tears for the children, and
Wow.
showing up. But I wonder if I kind of wonder, just given some of the other stuff that we noticed when we watched the footage, about how even now she seems to be a little bit of an odd person, and obviously being in jail for 4 years will do that. But yeah, maybe she's autistic. Maybe she's got no one says that bad things don't also happen to weird people, right?
Exactly. She could be autistic to some extent because
Like functional, yeah.
right, but that's like literally the only explanation here. Or she was like Queen Elizabeth, like you've mentioned before. Maybe this person was not into crying all that much. I feel like I'd be in a similar I'd react probably like in a similar fashion, because like yeah, you deal with the whole situation internally, at least some people do, so, and it doesn't really seem that way on the outside, when the mass majority would deem this as a inappropriate reaction by a mother who just lost her daughter. Maybe she
Yeah, I mean,
just dealt with it on the inside, and the people that were blaming her were used to crying like on a fairly regular basis, so who knows.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think of, like, like Australia is basically at that point, is still like kind of descent. It comes from British culture, just like America initially did. Though obviously we've since then blended with a lot of other different cultures. But certain cultures have different standards for what's appropriate behavior in public, and it's like certainly the British are known for being very reserved. I mean, much like the Germans, there's a stereotype of being of not always being appropriate to show a lot of emotion and a lot of sobbing and stuff. And I actually heard, it was something, I forget if it was a YouTube or something, where somebody was talking about they work at an emergency room, and they said like somebody from one culture where it's okay to express your emotions and kind of complain about things, somebody might be like in that waiting room just screaming and yelling, and they're like, you know what, that guy's actually probably okay. And then they said, oh no, but that like British or German guy who's hunched over there in the corner and doesn't really want to say anything, oh, he's about to die from a heart attack. You need to get him in the emergency room right now. He would rather die than embarrass himself or, you know, express
Right.
emotion in a way he thought was
Exactly.
inappropriate. You know what I mean? So maybe, yeah. I mean, look what it cost her though, right? For not crying.
Right. I mean, maybe if she acted more like the average person would, maybe she could have avoided the sentence. And how she came about having the whole sentence, well, now I'm probably gonna get this wrong, so I'm just gonna like say that I'm not completely sure of like the timeline. But maybe you can enlighten me here. When did they find the jumpsuit? You know, like let me just find the pictures, right? So this is when they find Azaria's jumpsuit that she was wearing at the time of her disappearance. Did they find the jumpsuit before the second inquest or after the second inquest has already commenced? Do you know about this?
That's where I'm confused. So, okay, let me see. There was questions about. So she was wearing a jacket over the jumpsuit.
Right.
They couldn't find the jacket, so the jumpsuit was what they found.
Yep.
Right away.
You're correct.
I think they right away, and they were like, okay, well, you know, and that was where they came up with all these theories that it didn't look ravaged enough, like a wild animal had ripped a baby out of it. Like it looked like they found a mark that they thought was too much like a knife, and yeah, they just thought like, it doesn't really fit like what their stereotype was of. And we talked about this in our last episode actually, about how a lot of people have the impression that dingoes always just rip everything apart like they were ripping up a bag of trash or something.
Oh yeah, because that's not the case, you know, like I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but like the dingoes, they actually, there was an experiment where there was like a piece of meat wrapped up in paper, and the dingo actually just unfolded the paper and ate the meat. So it's not like dingoes can't like, you know, they can't get into food without like tearing up the packaging of the food. This you know, the packaging being the jumpsuit or whatnot, you know, and the jacket as well. So they find the jumpsuit, and so once again, we're not completely sure when did they find the jumpsuit, whether it was prior to the second inquest or once the second inquest has already commenced. I feel like it may have been prior, because I feel like it's been only a few weeks, but don't quote me on this one, like I'm not necessarily 100% sure, but they found the jumpsuit, I feel like fairly shortly after she went missing, Azaria did. And as you mentioned before, the police did not believe that the jumpsuit that they found correlates to a dingo attack. To them, it correlated to a murder by slitting the throat of the baby. So that's when the second inquest commences, right? And what I'm reading here is that the Northern Territory Police and prosecutors were dissatisfied with the findings. Investigations continued, leading to a second inquest in Darwin, which is a town in Australia, in September of 1981. So the next year, based on ultraviolet photographs of Azaria's jumpsuit, James Cameron of the London Hospital Medical College alleged that, and this is his quote, there was an incised wound around the neck of the jumpsuit, in other words, a cut throat, and that there was an important imprint of the hand of a small adult on the jumpsuit visible in the photographs. Following this and other findings, the Chamberlains were charged with Azaria's murder. So, you know, that's pretty much what happened during the second inquest. Any thoughts on your end? Like, did they jump to conclusions a little bit too fast? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it looks like that classic case of cognitive bias where they have a theory, and then they're going to make what they perceive as the facts fit that theory, and they're going to basically exclude anything that doesn't fit that. Yeah, and they seem like determined at this point. Yeah.
to get the conviction, not to get the truth.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
an important thing to mention, and I think because we're gonna see a whole bunch of flaws right now. Like, I've actually prepared a little thing where we could like go through what the crown, the how do you say, like, not the defense but like the prosecution, right? Like the prosecution's case, because there's so many holes in the prosecution's case. Like, I have no idea how it went down. But I really think it was like the OJ Simpson situation, but like in reverse, if you know what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
where like the people are pressuring the court to get the conviction. Not like in OJ's, where OJ Simpson, where like myself and some other people would argue that he actually did it. The pressure was to not convict him. Because they were like afraid of another like LA riots situation. But in this case, it was like a whole complete reversal, where they were pressured to convict Lindy. So that was interesting, right? And we could go to like the case against Lindy Chamberlain, and we could just go like bit by bit and like just dissect all the BS in the case. So basically, the Crown alleged that Lindy Chamberlain had cut Azaria's throat in the front seat of the family car, hiding the baby's body in a large camera case. She then, according to the proposed reconstruction of the crime, rejoined the group of campers around a campfire and fed one of her sons a can of baked beans while the other son was back in the tent, which is a little bit odd, but whatever, before going to the tent and raising the cry that a dingo had taken the baby. It was alleged that at a later time, while other people from the campsite were searching, she disposed of the body. So immediately, you are sitting at the tent, everything's fine. You're sitting at the campfire, everything is fine. You come back to the tent, you take your, I guess, 9-year-old baby, you go to the car, while, as I mentioned before, Reagan is still in the tent. So you have to somehow make sure that Reagan does not raise any questions. Where are you taking Azaria? You take Azaria to the car, you get a scissors. Like, I don't know why they didn't go with the knife theory, why they had to go with the scissors, because it just seems like it's a lot more work to cut someone's throat with scissors. But whatever, you cut the throat with scissors, so immediately, most likely blood everywhere, blood on you, blood on the car, blood everywhere, whatever. You kill the baby, you put the baby in a camera case, you put a camera case in the back of the truck, or your family car, then you return to the campsite, then you go back to the tent, and then you come back to the campsite screaming that a dingo took my baby. Like, no sense, no sense.
Yeah,
Like, if you're going to kill your baby, if you're, that's it, like, you're set on killing your own baby, whatever. Like, there are better ways to do that. There are like better ways to arrange the whole situation to make it seem that it was actually an accident. And picking like the theory that a dingo took my baby, which was never heard of before, and thinking that this is just gonna fly, like this is no one's gonna question that, stuff, when it never happened before. Like, it's so, okay, so this is the first piece of like holes in the story. Like, how do you react to this?
No, it was perfect. You just said, especially like, just the cutting the throat part, and like, you get blood you ever like cut yourself shaving or do something where you're just, the stupid thing won't stop bleeding.
Yeah.
And there's just blood like all over your, once you get blood on your hands, it's real hard to get it off again. Like, you got to wash it with some good amount of water. And like you said, that the timing with like she's multitasking, like feeding kids and putting other kids to bed, and like,
and this is all happening within 10 minutes. 10 minutes.
In front of other people,
right?
That are eating, and just completely not even thinking about. I don't know the cops, what kind of demented murderers these cops were dealing with, that they think that somebody could do that and keep the presence of mind to
Right,
like,
exactly.
that would be such a psychopath.
Another thing, some people in the campsite, they then testified to the police that they actually heard a baby crying. So when everything was like the prosecution's
After the timing.
when the prosecution case was like falling apart, the people that were sitting in the campsite, they were like, yeah, I heard a baby cry. So okay, so that doesn't prove anything, their testimony, but what that does prove, that they could hear a baby crying from that campsite, in the tent. So if a baby's throat is being cut, I'm pretty sure the baby would cry. I mean, I don't know, maybe the car isolates the cries, I don't know, maybe that's the case, but anyhow, like to do, if Lindy was actually going to kill her, if Lindy actually did cut her daughter's throat in the car, she also had to make sure that the baby makes no sounds. And maybe we could go off of a theory that maybe the car isolates the sound just enough so that people at the campsite hear nothing. But what about Reagan? He's like right there, in the tent, and he's 4 at that point. Like 4-year-old kids are smarter than people think, they could remember this stuff. So okay, a bunch of holes. Let's follow along. The key evidence supporting this allegation was the jumpsuit, as well as highly contentious forensic report claiming to have found evidence of, I'm not gonna pronounce this correct, fetal hemoglobin in stains.
Fetal hemoglobin.
Okay, yeah. Fetal hemoglobin in stains on the front seat of the Chamberlain's 1977 Torana hatchback. Fetal hemoglobin is present in infants 6 months and younger. Azaria was 9 weeks old at the time of her disappearance, so infants 6 months and younger. So Azaria does fall into like the demographic of people that would actually have this substance in their body. But for my research, I actually found out that even adults sometimes have this substance in them. It's just in really small amounts, so it's like it never really, I guess, leaves your body completely. It's just in infants, they have it a lot more, but like, so this really didn't prove anything. Then we're following along. Lindy Chamberlain was questioned about the garments that Azaria was wearing. She claimed that Azaria was wearing a matinee jacket, so another jacket over the jumpsuit, over the jumpsuit, but the jacket was not present when the garments were found. She was questioned about the fact that Azaria's singlet, which was inside the jumpsuit, was inside out. She insisted that she never put a singlet on her baby's inside out, and that she was most particular about this. The statement conflicted with the state of the garments when they were collected as evidence. The garments had been arranged by the investigating essentially officer for a photograph. So like the singlet was found inside out, and obviously who would put a singlet on a baby inside out? Like, that was stupid to me. Obviously that would immediately, to me personally, indicate that it could correlate with the fact that a dingo actually took Azaria, because as the dingo was dragging Azaria, maybe maybe she, like, I don't know how should I put it, she like was dragged out of the singlet. And like when you're removing clothes, or when you like dragging clothes off your body, like they come inside out. You know what I'm saying? Like I am making sense here, am I not?
Yeah.
So
for sure.
Right. So that would make sense, but I guess the police,
it's gonna invert it.
Right, but the police probably were like, nah, these guys are some weird church, 7-day church Adventist. They wear their clothes inside out, like, screw these guys, So I think that's how the situation went down, So in her defense, eyewitnesses evidence was presented of dingoes having been seen in the area On the evening of 17th August 1980, all witnesses claimed to believe the Chamberlain's story. One witness, a nurse, also reported having heard a baby's cry after the time when the prosecution alleged Azaria had been murdered. Evidence was also presented that adult blood also passed the test used for fetal hemoglobin, and that other organic compounds can produce similar results on that particular test, including mucus from the nose and chocolate milkshakes, both of which had been present in the vehicle where Azaria was allegedly murdered. So, that completely explains the hemoglobin being in the car, like, at least to me, right? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and then it makes it's funny because even like stuff like hair samples now that people always took is like all these things that people take as just it's scientific law. We know for sure now, and then we find out, a couple of years later, that was not really true. They were kind of operating on false assumptions. So like can you imagine like a station wagon or whatever kind of car it was for like a family with like three kids under,
Deja 4, the 5.
I was just thinking back, like, it's funny because I didn't really have to deal with this too much because I only have one kid, but like I remember when I was a little kid, and my sisters are not that far away from me in age, and like it's kind of like my least favorite part of childhood, because I think even as like a young kid, you can kind of like realize what a pain in the ass everything is for your parents, like with like a baby and then another toddler, and then like
yeah, definitely.
you're the oldest one at like age 4 or whatever, or 5, and it's
my god,
there's just it's like this like 3-ring circus that your poor mom is trying to run in the car and like feed with like the bottle and the snack things and all that stuff. Like there's just crap all over the car. Like the car's friggin' filthy, and they're like, oh, there's blood stains all over this car. No, dude, it's like chocolate pudding. It's just it's just organic. I mean, which will have protein in it, right? Anything that has dairy in it, anything that has like, I mean, even Jello has like is made out of like what, animal hooves or something. Like all those like all that stuff is made out of like organic compounds that probably, to somebody who's got a cognitive bias, looks like some kind of devious human ingredient that's been spilled all over the car. And it's like, no, dude, that's just a
like
milkshake.
Just a milkshake, right?
Yeah.
I mean, these police guys, they were determined to convict Lindy Chamberlain. All right, so let's move along. We have a few more, statements. Engineer Les Harris, who had continued dingo research for over a decade, said that contrary to Cameron's findings, a dingo's carnassial teeth can shear through material as tough as motor vehicle seat belts. Okay, so that's a lot. He also cited an example of a captive female dingo removing a bundle of meat from its wrapping paper and leaving the paper intact. So they were smart. Dingoes are actually smart animals. Evidence was also presented to the effect that a dingo was strong enough to carry a kangaroo, and like a full-grown kangaroo. So that's definitely a lot like heavier than 8-9-week-old baby. And a report of the removal of a 3-year-old girl by a dingo from the back seat of a tourist motor vehicle at the camping area just weeks before an event witnessed by the parents. So at this point, there are no there's not even a question whether or not a dingo could carry a 9-week-old baby. At 4.5 kilograms, I think your regular dog could do that with ease, so I don't think that's like a question even. And finally, the defense's case was rejected by the jury. Lindy Chamberlain was convicted of a murder on 29th October in 1982 and sentenced to life imprisonment. Michael Chamberlain, the husband, was found guilty as an accessory after the fact and was given an 18-month suspended sentence. Like, what is that even about, Like,
yeah, I was trying to figure like how the hell he was even, what they were arguing, like I don't know if he was, I guess they said accessory after the fact, so I guess maybe like supposedly he knew it and somehow tried to help her cover it up, but then yeah, it gets like almost just a slap in the wrist compared to her. As I understand it, it's funny because I actually added this in our own notes here from something else I saw on YouTube.
Right.
It wasn't just life imprisonment; it was life imprisonment with hard labor. So like, case in point, yeah, like. She has the baby in jail. And it's like, all right, back to hard labor for you. You know, take a 10-minute break and then you're back to your sentence. I mean, yeah, it's pretty
labor?
awful. I mean,
I wonder if they still have that. You know?
Yeah, I wonder what they even mean by that. Like, what are you making license plates or something?
Like once they told me that, like, I immediately like got like this. Like
breaking rocks or something, yeah.
Like North Korean vibe, you know, like Australia, like it was like North Korea almost, you know, like you can never have, like it was crazy. Back in the 80s, you could actually not have a fair trial. And they were like savages, you know. They take your baby away and put you back into like, you know, hard labor. So
concentration camp. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I wonder what they meant by that. If it's like. I mean, are you breaking rocks or something like the old days?
That's immediately like the
poor Lindy with the sledgehammer trying to break. Yes, I mean, and then you know it says here the you know they went and they tried to appeal the case, but it got slapped back down. So
which kind of looked stupid, you know. But like what I've gathered, it was because of the pressure from the public, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's too bad. It really looks like kind of a kangaroo court for her. And then, I mean, the crazy part is apparently I mean, not that they were in a position to pay it, but apparently this racked up a whole huge amount of legal bills for them as well. Like, so every time they do one of these interviews, they had to do it. So then lo and behold, it was kind of amazing because just as quickly as it seemed like they railroaded her and her husband, things kind of unraveled just as quickly.
Right. So what happened next? Like, I'm trying to find the correct.
So here it is. So I have it. Okay. Is that in 1986, somebody named David Brett was, I guess, climbing the rocks. So doing what you're supposed to go down there to do, and he fell, and he died. But they didn't. It actually took them 8 days to find his remains, which is interesting. So I don't know if it just no one knew he was missing until for a while. But when they find his remains,
right,
and they're kind of looking around, and they're like, there's a bunch of dingo layers around here. And while they're looking for his missing bones, because you know anything that dies around there is going to get scavenged pretty quick. Like we mentioned, it's in the middle of nowhere, so like any animal around there is having to work pretty hard for its dinner every day.
I'm sure, like, right? Like what even is?
What do they eat? I
can't
even believe the fact that there are dingoes out there. I really got to ask, like, what are they eating out there? Because I can't imagine kangaroos or anything are out there. Like, where's the water? So I don't even understand what the dingoes are eating, that they're even around there.
Right, I'm trying to find this out, like what they eat, but like
what's their diet there? Like, no wonder they're so aggressive, especially if you start feeding them and making them think like there's food there. But yeah, so they're looking around, they're like, oh, okay, this guy probably got ripped apart after you know he died, and they're like, oh, look, here's that missing matinee jacket that we were looking for, you know, 5 years ago, and oh, whoops. And I think you have a picture of that somewhere, but it showed all these signs of, like, obviously, you know, it was like the whole stereotype that we were saying about what people said things look like after dingoes rip them apart. They're like, oh yeah, it does look like a dingo kind of chewed on a baby in it for a while. And you know, of course, they never found the baby's bones, but I think they figured, I mean, you know, like some animals will even eat the bones.
Right.
You know, they like hyenas will do that.
Well, you know, I just quickly, you know, wanted to like breeze through what the dingo's like diet is. Yeah. So I found it, and it says here that the study found that these canines prey on 177 species. So, you know, it pretty much means they
Everything.
eat like everything. Like if it
Bugs,
moves,
lizards,
literally everything. So 72.3% is mammals. So 71 species of mammals, birds, vegetation, reptiles, like fish, crabs, and frogs. Like these guys will literally eat anything. They see a baby, like that's a meal. That's like that's a big ass meal, So they see these guys see a baby, they're gonna go for that baby. If a dingo hasn't ate like in I don't know, man, 2 weeks, because like it would seem like the case in like the outback, it could get like to those long periods of time when you just are out of luck. You see a baby and you're like, man, if I either eat this like weird little creature that I've never seen before, a little baby, or
it's like a steak.
It's like or I die, So it's in this weird tent. There's like these bigger, like monkey-like humans roaming around, but they don't seem to be around here right now. So I'm just gonna take this baby, like fuck it,
That is one thing to point out is I guess everybody. So the assumption had been about dingoes. Apparently, dingoes act really shy. They're kind of like how coyotes act here in the where I live. Like coyotes are pretty elusive. Like you don't really like if a coyote. By the time you even try to like start chasing it, it's like a mile away. It just hauls ass out of there. But like, I guess one interesting thing about animal behavior is. Wild animals tend, unless they're like sharks or something like that, where they just eat whatever they want. They're so stupid they're just eating machines. But a lot of animals, any animals with like any kind of brains, they tend to kind of like err on the side of caution because like there's no health insurance in the wild world, right? So if you get hurt or if you get a scratch or you get infected, like that's it. Like it's a wrap. The game's over. So it makes sense that dingoes, for the most part, would be more cautious about like humans, which they didn't really adapt. They didn't really evolve around. Apparently they haven't, I was looking this up, I was researching them. They haven't at all genetically changed in the past few thousand years. So it's like humans are a relatively recent arrival for them, though they think maybe they came with humans. They're not sure, but under the assumption they didn't, like humans are still a weird creature. So like for the most part, it's like if there's food around, like okay, like there's something else I can eat. I'm not going to risk like breaking a leg or getting hurt. And they do think that humans are the reason why most of the large land animals in Australia are gone, because when humans arrived, suddenly all these other huge animals that were living in Australia the thousands of years before human arrival disappeared. So they think that all these animals that like didn't know anything about humans just got dingoes are like the exception, but.
Right,
but yeah, like
I'm just looking at this picture. Yo, I want a dingo, man.
Yeah,
I want to get one of these guys. They look so cute, lol.
And that's the other part of it is apparently there's all these people that are like, oh, the cute dingoes. There's like a whole like pro dingo movement of people that get like every time that they end up having to like every time a dingo does something like this, and it turned out it has happened after this. Even an 8-year-old kid's skull got crushed by one of them. Every time something happens where a dingo gets too aggressive and they have to like take him out, there's all these protesters and people, oh no, the poor dingoes. And so there's like probably that was also going against Lindy with just, the kind of usual suspects crying about everything with wild animals. And it's like, oh no, there are wild animals that are jerks or that do things that are not compatible with us.
They do really seem skinny, like in a sense that, this looks like a dog that's gonna eat anything. You throw it away. It looks like it hasn't eaten in a while, man.
And I mean, in that place, I mean, I'm so glad you showed it on the map because just it gives the context of like, I feel like the dingoes that are nearer to the cities, while they might be braver, they're also like less desperate, right? Because they got all that trash and stuff to eat, and like unlike animals that are living in like a more lush environment. But like that place that looks like you'd be like the most desperate dingoes in the world to live down there.
Right, but like as you can see, like like the dingo population right here, we have this on the map. If you're watching this on YouTube, you could like see right now the distribution of wild dogs, essentially dingoes in Australia. So as you can see, like the big cities, right, like the Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Perth. There's not much of like a dingo population. Maybe like a little bit of like in Sydney territory right here, but like they mostly live in the outback, in the center of the outback. So maybe they are not compatible with like humans at all. You know what I'm saying? Like,
well, yeah, but some of it was also actually from what I was seeing. I think from when I was researching our last episode, some of it was from human intervention because it got to be such a problem with them killing cattle, just like wolves killing cattle, in Europe and in the U.S. That they built a massive like fence, like a Great Wall of China level fence, barrier fence,
like
just to
we are
keep
looking at
dingoes
it
out.
right now. This
Yeah,
is
yeah.
a almost 6,000 kilometer fence. Like
Oh
what?
my God.
What the hell, man? And
Yeah.
so
So
it's a big
so that'll
problem,
keep them out, right?
right? And they have like
Maybe.
these like whole things with like the warning signs. Anyhow, okay, so going back to the story. Another hole is a big hole, and I mentioned to you, I talked to you about it prior to recording, and this is like one of the first things that came at me, like, that was odd, was the fact that, like, let's look at this infographic right here. Okay, so basically we can see the original campsite. We can see like the general store. I guess it's a good place to have a store. There's low competition, and there's always like tourists willing to spend money, so that makes sense. We can see like the area where Azaria vanished, and near here, like we can see the Chamberlain's tent as well. We can see like where the jumpsuit was found, right? So we can see like the jumpsuit was found here, right? And there's like this road around the rock. So I'm just gonna like quickly try to illustrate in like what I think happened. Essentially, Azaria goes missing. The huge search party starts searching for Azaria. They begin here where Azaria was initially missing. So I'm assuming they're going in all directions at first, but the Aboriginal trackers, the really good ones, they actually start following the footsteps of the dingoes, because there were like footsteps in the dingo footsteps near the tent. So once again, the police is really not doing its job here. So again, they start following the footsteps, and they actually go somewhere towards this road around the Uluru, or whatever it's called. I probably butchered it now, but the tracks actually disappear somewhere around this road. Maybe after the dingo crosses its road, you can't really like keep tracking it. I don't know what the case was, but they stopped somewhere around this area. And then a short while from that, okay, so not finding the jumpsuit, the initial jumpsuit that led to the prosecution of Lindy Chamberlain, okay, not finding the jumpsuit immediately could probably make sense. Okay, that would make sense. It's a pretty big area, maybe 300 people. It's still a bit suspicious, how no one checked it. Maybe no one was thinking that the dingo would go near the mountain. It would just go somewhere in a different direction. Okay, that's completely normal. Still a little bit odd, but normal. The thing is, why did it take 4 years and only by a complete accident to find the jacket, which was just around the rock? Like, once you found the jumpsuit, and this lady, Lindy Chamberlain, is constantly reassuring everyone that there was another jacket that she was wearing, and that was like her main point of defense, that there's no blood on the jumpsuit or no indications of dingo on the jumpsuit because she was also wearing a jacket, and there would be indications on the jacket. Why would they not just circle around the rock? Like, you could probably do that in a few days. You know what I'm saying? And just like, look,
Yeah.
why no one looked for 4 years? If that guy was not going like rock climbing, I don't know, man. Lindy could still be in prison to this day. So that's just insanity when you like put things in perspective,
Yeah, and it's like either she really got lucky by this guy being so unlucky,
Yeah.
or like you're basically implying here, like, really they should have looked a little harder, because it doesn't, I mean, what are the odds that the guy falls in the exact spot where
Oh my god, what if
is,
the guy
right?
was what if the guy went like climbing on another side?
Yeah, another little
Oh
nodule
my
of it.
god.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it doesn't. It just makes you wonder. Like, did they get out there and they're like, you know what? It's real hot out here. I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, we both know she's guilty. Let's not look too much. Like, I mean, they say that all these people looked, but
Right.
well, we were talking about this before. Like, just like the kid. I mean, if there's one theme from our show, from the several months we've been doing this, and we're up to like what, episode
36.
36? Yeah. So the one theme is like kind of like half-assed police work
Oh my
and
god, we notice
searches
this
and
all the time, man.
yeah,
You,
like
you,
what's going on?
you know what it makes me wonder
What?
about? It makes me think about how many active unsolved cases there are that we could like literally like just look into a little bit deeper, find the holes, and like
Yeah.
actually go there and solve them. Like if oh my god, there's probably a bunch.
I think there was I think there was even one like that out in the desert. I forget what state it is in where like that happened, where they were like, hey, whatever happened to this missing persons case? And a couple of people put their heads together and actually solved the mystery. But
Oh wow.
yeah, so I mean it's kind of ridiculous. So I think that's one of the things that really sticks out to me. And we were talking about this before. We're like, just like the Casey Anthony case, though we will compare this to that in a second, but just like that one where like the kid's body was sitting there in the park, like not a mile from the house that she disappeared from, supposedly, or where she lived,
Yeah.
and where the parents lived, and the body's sitting there for months and nobody finds it, even though it's just a normal park. And this poor like meter reading guy has to go like bug them like a bunch of times because he kept taking a smoke break over there or whatever. Yeah, I mean, it's just like
horrible.
Like not a good theme. So I mean, I guess to Australia's credit, once all this evidence breaks and they kind of find this chewed up baby jacket that's all bloody.
This thing right there. I just want to quickly come back to the photographs of the evidence. This is not the jacket. This is the jumpsuit. So it's because it says here Azaria Chamberlain jumpsuit as photographed by police. So even the jumpsuit looks messed up.
Yeah, like what? I mean,
but like if someone cuts someone's throat, like it would seem like that, So it does correlate with. But I guess the thing is they didn't find dingo stuff on it, like no hairs, no DNA, no nothing, no saliva, no nothing, because the saliva, their whole thing was like the saliva would have been absorbed by the the jumpsuit, and we would probably could test that out, and they didn't find it. But actually,
and then they actually imagined some handprint. Like it turned out afterwards, the handprint wasn't really a handprint. It was like
what was it then?
Dust. I think it was just like a dust pattern or something. It was like almost like a Rorschach blot where everybody sees what they want in it.
Oh, wait, because the interesting detail is that I read, like they came to the conclusion that there was a handprint from a photograph, not from like actually looking at the piece of clothing at the jumpsuit. From the photograph. I'm almost 100% sure this is the photograph we're looking at. And like, do you see a handprint? Like the only thing I could see, maybe this general area right here. Could this be a handprint? Because I don't see a handprint, man. Like.
Yeah, and it doesn't even make sense. It's
you have to look really hard for this handprint, man.
Yeah. It just seems like they wanted to see it. So
they find this then, just as
oh my god, yeah.
So they find this. It's completely messed up. Yeah.
So that's like case solved right there. So once that comes out, it does look like they pretty much fast tracked her getting out of jail right away, and so like they ordered her immediate release. Like I was actually surprised. I was like, because here in the U.S. when that happens, it's actually like 2 times out of 3, the poor schmuck will still be in jail for like a couple months while they go through the red tape. I mean, and once in a while you'll have a judge who's just like, no, this is outrageous, get this guy out of jail. But yeah, in her case, they're like, oh no, you need to let this lady out of jail.
Immediately,
she probably didn't do it. Yeah, and then the Northern Territory Courts of Criminal Appeals unanimously overturned all convictions against her and her husband. and it says the exoneration was based on rejection of 2 key points of the prosecution's case and of biased and invalid assumptions made during the initial trial. So, I think it raised a lot of concerns about the kind of work the police were doing, the kind of so-called expert testimony and scientific evidence that turned out to really not be as scientific as it was depicted to be. So, just because someone goes in there and says something scientific sounding doesn't mean that they're a scientist that actually can prove that. Now, a lot of science.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're completely correct, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, you see that even with some other kinds of things that we've always taken. Yeah, as
by the way, right.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, like, this is how the jacket probably looked beforehand.
Oh wow.
And this is how it looked afterhand. So I feel like case solved here. So I'm definitely not gonna question her innocence at this point. Also another interesting fact, like these are like the pictures when she was like asked to identify the jacket, and she probably could not even identify it because it was so messed up.
Yeah.
So she was like. Like she
what
was,
is this thing?
What is this? It's like, do you put like this thing on a baby? Like, what is this?
Right. Yeah.
So
it's ridiculous. So 2 years after they were exonerated, they were awarded $1.3 million in compensation, which for wrongful imprisonment, which sounds like a lot of money. I mean, even now that's a lot of money, but like in 80s dollars. I would say that was probably, I'm not sure if those are Australian dollars or US dollars that they put there, but in US dollars, 1.3 million would probably be something closer to like $8 or $9 million now. But unfortunately, it didn't even cover it. Well, it covered didn't even cover a third of their legal expenses, supposedly. So,
what? So they so they didn't even get anything, like, because when I read it, okay, so they got like $1 million plus.
Yeah.
So, back in the day money, that's like what, like 3 million? No, not 3 million, maybe like a 1.5, something like that, right? But yeah, so they didn't get even compensated properly. So.
Not really, not fair. I mean, not that anybody could really compensate them, but yeah, not fairly for what it was.
This is interesting, what I found. So Frank Cole, the Melbourne pensioner, made headlines in 2004 when he claimed he'd shot the dingo the night it killed Azaria and showed her body to his mates before it was buried in a suburban backyard. He passed a lie detector test, but his claim that he kept ribbons from Azaria's matinee jacket when there were none contributed to widespread skepticism. Well, okay, I feel like this is just a crazy guy somehow passing a lie detector test,
Yeah, just like the John Bonet thing where you had all these weirdos like claiming that they did it.
I mean, if you're just a pensioner, and you're claiming that happened, you're probably just crazy. Who wants to go to prison, or like have legal issues? I think this guy was just like crazy.
Somebody wants attention,
right?
Yeah. So yeah, there was, and he was. Let's see what else. As we're kind of wrapping it up before we get to our reactions at the end, but
right.
Yeah, I mean, the thing was, like, it's also worth pointing out that even during the trial, all the families, like everybody that was there with her, was like, no, she didn't do this. Like they were all on her side. Nobody thought she was weird or some creep like that. They all, like you said, there were people that heard the baby crying in times that didn't fit the timeline of when the baby was supposedly killed by the mother, and it didn't make sense, and I guess there's been several different movies made since, but one of the most famous ones was with Meryl Streep, I was kind of amazed. Like, I knew she'd been nominated for Oscars a lot of times, but Meryl Streep's been nominated for Oscars 21 times.
Oh my god.
Yeah, she's the most nominated actor ever. in history.
I feel like is she like any good? Like I know it's probably like
oh no, yeah. I mean, she's good for sure. She gets kind of political here in the States, but especially in the past few years. But yeah, no, she like. I mean, she plays whoever it is she's playing like perfectly. It's like she does the work. So
so she's really talented. Okay.
Yeah, she's won 3 Oscars out of 21 tries. So that's.
I mean, that's not the best win rate, but still, who has like 3 Oscars? You know?
Yeah, exactly. I don't even know if anyone else has 3 Oscars.
Right.
Yeah,
it took Leonardo DiCaprio like 40 movies or something to get one.
Yeah, and you have some like who really should, like Tom Cruise doesn't have any Oscars, and he's as nutty as he might be in his personal life.
A Solvable Mysteries Podcast episode just waiting to happen, man.
Yeah, the funny thing is, just as a side note, I've heard that he is an amazingly great coworker to work with. Like I've heard this as well. Yeah, he's got an amazing memory, and he's really nice to people, and so I think on a professional level, yeah. I mean, it just goes to show you though that she's got. Plus, the other thing is about Meryl Streep, she picks the parts that are kind of hard characters to play. So like this case in point, it's not like a super sympathetic person. I mean, it is and it isn't, right? The thing that happened is sympathetic, but the person herself is a little bit problematic, and I guess the perceptions of her. So Meryl Streep isn't afraid to like take that on. So yeah.
Right.
Anyway.
Another like dig at Meryl Streep. I'm not necessarily a dig, but like when she was doing this movie, right? She actually, on one of the interviews when she was filming, either after she was done filming or during filming, can't really tell. She actually said that as the longer that I look at this whole case, the longer I feel like there was foul play involved. So that was her statement, and I think that backfired a little bit, to say the least.
That's interesting.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
I don't know. Strange. It just makes me question how hard was she looking into this,
Yeah, I mean,
it's like because once you start looking into it, like it doesn't seem like any foul play was involved at all. Like maybe foul play from the police. Maybe that's what she meant.
The dingoes committed a crime.
Right, foul play from dingoes. Maybe that's what she meant.
Dingoes definitely broke the law. Should have gone to jail.
Right.
I mean, so then I guess as we're coming up right at the end here, the one thing somebody might ask us, because I mean, I know I myself especially came at the Casey Anthony thing real hard, where I was unambiguously anti Casey Anthony, and she's guilty, and somebody might I mean, somebody could look at that and the way Americans reacted to that case and go, well, that's why is there a double standard? Why do you believe Lindy Chamberlain but not Casey Anthony? And it's like, well, because why? Because Casey Anthony made worse faces, and it's like, no, it's not that. It's like all the other facts of the case. I think there's just a massive gulf of difference between Lindy Chamberlain, who had a reputation as a responsible mother, and who had all these good character witnesses and just a solid track record as a human being, and Casey Anthony, who really was the complete opposite, had a reputation as being a liar.
I mean, this is Casey Anthony after her daughter's missing.
So,
this is when her daughter is missing. So good times.
The picture in her mugshot where she's like, "Uh-oh, I got caught now." Yeah. So I mean, like for all the criticism that, I guess maybe that's why Casey Anthony took such a beating in the American press and perception, because
she deserved that beating,
Yeah. I mean, if there is a double standard about men and women and perceptions and how women are supposed to act, well, poor Lindy got trashed just for not crying enough. Look at Casey Anthony, right? She's like, seems celebratory that her baby's
right,
dead. So
I mean, right? That's actually a really nice, I don't know, man, link up to these cases that you've done. I didn't even think about it, but yeah, when you put it that way, there is like some, Case Anthony, like it's a whole different situation. You can't compare. So yeah, so quick notes. These guys divorced sometime later on. This Michael Chamberlain person, the father of Azaria, he actually died recently in 2017. He actually became a successful writer, I believe, because like all of the right. So this is him like when he was a little older. They say that he was like a like a writer, and he was known for like writing books. So yeah, he wrote like Beyond Ellen White, Seventh-day Adventism in Transition. Okay, so he was writing about like his church stuff, so he was like with the church for a long time, so I mean, I guess that's what it was. I mean, for what it's worth, I didn't really find anything too horrible about the Seventh-day Advent church, like any like crazy theories. They didn't really jump at me, so I don't really have anything against those guys. So they seem all right, like just some religious guys. So pretty much I don't know, man, like if you want to add anything, I'm pretty much ready to wrap this up. I think this was an excellent episode. It was a very interesting case. I feel like it's solved. To give our reactions, I guess I'm definitely going with the dingo theory, or at least some other animal, not necessarily dingo. I haven't really looked into if they found like hairs and saliva in that, I guess, jacket. They probably have, so I guess that explains the whole case, and it was probably dingoes, but definitely not. In my eyes, definitely not a work of a mother who somehow miraculously in 10 minutes managed to cut her daughter's throat with a pair of scissors, then clean the car up, hide the body, make sure that nobody noticed this stuff, make sure that her son who was in the tent doesn't hear Azaria's crying, doesn't ask any questions. Where did you just took Azaria when she allegedly took to kill Azaria? It's just a mess. I think Azaria is innocent. I'm definitely will say that, right? So that's my conclusion.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the thing that bothers me, well, lots of things bother me: the way she was railroaded, the impact in her life, and the lost years. That she can't get those years back of bonding with her baby. I think that's the part that disgusted me the most about how she was treated when she, had her kid. That's such an important part of her life and her child's life, and they can't ever get that back. And that money wasn't enough. Like, really, it seems like people should have been punished coming out of that, given what happened. But yeah, I mean, the other thing I think that bothers me is just that some part of it was people that are like that love dingoes more than another human being. And like, I'm not saying like you should be for doing something to animals out of cruelty, or that humans always,
of course, yeah,
that you should just slaughter them. But I think it's important not to anthropomorphize dingoes. So like the same way where it would sound absurd for me to say we should punish the dingoes for what they did, I mean, no, it's not that. Like, obviously, if you did find one that was hunting humans, you need to take it out and get it out of there, because it's not acting in a way that works for us. And I'm going to take our side over the wild. But I think in that same way that would be ridiculous for me to say we should put the dingo in trial. Like, don't you know what I mean? Like, don't the people also shouldn't like ascribe like some kind of unnatural set of values that dingoes don't have. Dingoes don't value us at all. They may be scared of us, they may be nervous, but like,
who could blame them? Like, they're trying to get food in the middle of nowhere.
It's a steak in the middle of the desert. I mean, that like for some reason these humans just walked away from in their tent. I mean, unfortunately, parents do a lot of stupid things, and I think, you know, if Lindy was guilty of anything, it was of being too trusting of wild animals, and maybe that's a product of that same Disney level anthropomorphizing of animals, and us thinking that, you know, animals, that we can somehow control them or ever be safe around them. Like, no, like a wild animal is a wild animal. You should always be on your guard.
Exactly.
So that's my final thought on that.
Right. So we're wrapping this up now, guys. This has been episode number 36. As always, I'll let you guys know to catch us on our next episode, episode number 37. And we actually have a case for 37 already, so we're gonna be going back to a little bit more of a paranormal side of things here on the podcast. So we're gonna be covering a very interesting like, what was it called again? Like, I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation if I say it right now.
I think it's
Tunguska, right? So it was like this whole big explosion in the middle of Siberia, or it was an interesting, weird, paranormal type of a case where there's a lot of questions still being asked, and we're gonna be looking into those questions. So we're gonna be like going into that case. It's not gonna be a murder case, anything like this has been. So I'm excited to take a little detour. So definitely catch us then. And for now, guys, stay safe and peace out.